Do you know a company that is actively innovating in freight or disrupting the industry with its new approach? Nominate them to become a 2025 Freight Tech company, and they could be honored as one of the Freight Tech 100 or the Freight Tech 25. Past honorees include Amazon, FedEx, JB Hunt, Project 44, Tesla, and many more. Companies can nominate themselves or other industry leaders that are making waves in the freight marketplace. Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Don't forget to subscribe to Check Call, the newsletter, on FreightWaves.com if you haven't already. Today we are welcoming John Sutton, Director of Corporate Strategy at Sunset Transportation. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you so much for having me, Mary. I'm excited to be on.
I am excited to also take a visit back to my old stomping grounds and kind of see and kind of share what makes Sunset kind of cool about everything and cooler than some other people. Before we get too far into that, though, let's get some background on you and kind of how you got started at Sunset.
Sure. I am currently a 10-year veteran of Sunset Transportation, as crazy as that is to believe. So I have a lifelong kind of generational background in trucking in one way or another. Both my grandpa and my dad were Class A CDL holders and to this day still, and truck drivers. So obviously it made sense that I should go work for a freight brokerage. Right. I remember graduating college and getting the opportunity here at Sunset. And I was just so excited to call my dad. And I'm just like, hey, I've got a job at Sunset Transportation. And he immediately hangs up on me. So I call back again. I'm just like, sorry, we got disconnected. I got a job at Sunset Transportation. He goes, oh, I know. And he hangs up on me again. And I call him back, and this was like a real like Darth Vader and Luke kind of moment, like level of betrayal. Thanksgiving and Christmas are still kind of awkward whenever we talk about the topic, but it's all in good fun. Starting off in track and trace, and over time familiarize myself with the business to the point that I'm now the director of corporate strategy.
That is quite a twisty turny way, but it does further confirm my theory of one of two ways that someone gets involved in supply chain and freight brokerage is that you're either born into it or you fall backwards into it and you can't get out. So you've kind of done a little bit of both, and I absolutely love that. My theory continues to hold strong.
Yeah, I just think back to, going on road trips, traveling to baseball tournaments as a kid, and my dad being on the phone in the car with other drivers, and just hearing the stories of the men and women behind the wheel and everything that they go through to support the backbone of our economy every single day. I was predetermined that I was coming into logistics and supply chain. I wanted to be able to make an impact.
I absolutely love that. But speaking of making an impact, one of the things that I always, having been at a couple different brokerages and then spending some time at Sunset with you guys, one thing that you guys do a little bit differently than everyone else is that carrier performance monitoring. You guys really kind of take that to the next level, other than just like, this is how many times you've been on time, maybe be better, or like just kind of something like that. You guys really do strive for those carrier relationships, and one of the ways that I think you guys really build that nicely is your carrier performance monitoring. So why is that so important to you guys, and what kind of metrics have you found to be the most successful in getting your carriers engaged and making sure that they are picking up on time and ultimately servicing customers?
It's critical to us, Mary, because all of our partner carriers that we contract are an extension of us. They are a representation of us whenever they're arriving at a facility to pick up or deliver freight. So I'm a firm believer that without a client, there's nothing to ship, but without a carrier, there's nothing to bill, meaning that both the client and the carrier are equally as important to a sustainable freight brokerage. And carrier performance with us starts before the partner carrier is even in our ecosystem or that first shipment has been routed. And I believe that that's on the agenda to talk about what tools we have available to us to help qualify and determine what makes a carrier a serviceable carrier before they ever haul our first load for us. But once they are through the gate and we begin working with them, we take a multifaceted approach. There is the quantitative approach that you had just mentioned. How many loads are are you doing? Are you picking up and delivering on time? What's your claims percentage? Everybody can do that. The modern TMS is going to have on-demand access to those data points to be able to help do that. But there's also what we do very particular in the way of qualitative data. And the best way I can put it is like, Mary, are you familiar with an NPS score? November Papa Sierra NPS. Okay, so it's a net promoter score, right? And it's most commonly how likely are you to recommend my services to a friend or to a colleague. However, internally, we do the reverse of that with partner carriers, particularly new ones that we've began working with. And after the first few loads, each load that a carrier has done with us within a certain amount of loads, internally a Sunset team member has to answer the question, what is your likelihood to work with this carrier again, and in a similar manner. And that is such a rich and powerful data point that takes us 1 to 2 seconds each day to be able to get on carriers that we just got done doing our first load with, for example. And we really enrich that alongside the quantitative data that we're getting to really determine what makes a carrier a true strategic carrier that we want to continue to align with, or what makes a carrier someone, that we're not necessarily interested in aligning with long term, but we're more than happy to work with them transactionally as needed. Or the very worst of that, hey, we haven't had enough reportable good experiences with this carrier that while the numbers are good, we actually just don't want to work with them anymore. So I think that qualitative dimension that we've introduced into carrier performance is really a differentiator for how we set the table with each load that we go to the table with a new carrier.
I think that's actually a pretty unique approach because it's not only, okay, yeah, this carrier's worked for us in the past and no one really has anything bad to say about them, but just like, for lack of a better phrase, the vibe's off. It's not someone that you necessarily want to work with again, but it's someone that if you fall on hard times, it's a good resort before posting it on a load board or going out to potentially an unknown tested carrier. So I think that's really like a good approach. And also I feel like that has to be a really great way to help that carrier retention to know, okay, this is where we want to spend our time, effort, and energy on these over here, and these over here, we'll just keep them around. If we need them, they're kind of like a backup. You always got to have a plan B.
Yeah, and it really helps to create that magic quadrant of emerging carriers, if you will. Carriers that we've done a handful of loads with them recently, but the scores that are coming back for likely willingness to work with them again are just through the roof. And that really helps to bring them to the top of the funnel for our carrier relations team to say, okay, maybe we need to sit down and really explore what partnership opportunities are here with this carrier, because in the early stages, our team members are ranting and raving about working with them.
So when it comes to, you have these carriers that you want to keep working with, you're like, yes, this is it. This is where we're going to put our energy. These are the ones that we want to choose. What happens when there is like a service failure or there is a performance issue? Obviously, you can't control the weather. If someone gets snowed in somewhere, it happens. It does. It's the nature of the business. But some of those more predictable ones of, oh, truck's in the shop, or oh, he's on his way, oh, he's 30 minutes away, and those kind of excuses start to pop up. Is that something that you guys continue to monitor, kind of like as some of these, ideal carriers start having these performance issues? Do you start kind of working them back, or even kind of how do you address those performance issues that you have with them?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we really see that there's so much more to the story than what the numbers tell us leads to a performance issue. And a recent example is we had a carrier partner that whenever they were working with one of our offices, Office A, it was nothing but great experiences, great on time, non-existent claims. But whenever they were working with other Sunset offices outside of that office, the service levels were atrocious. The willingness to work with that carrier again, non-existent. And now we have like these diverging data points, right? It's okay, what's going on here? And we found that Office A and the dispatcher that they were working with at that carrier had access to a different set of drivers than we were getting access to with our other offices and the freight that we were routing on them. So after peeling back the layers of that onion, now all of the freight that we have is being routed through the preferred dispatcher for Office A, and it's ultimately been a win-win for us and the carrier by being able to secure them more freight, working with that contact that was giving us great service, and at the same time being able to have higher service levels for everything that we were routing on them. So really cool use case there as to how you can use that data to enrich the process.
That is something that you honestly probably would have never noticed until you sat down and like just sat there and said, okay, what is the problem? And if you just would have just looked at the numbers and said, okay, well, they're not meeting it across the board, so maybe it's not something we want to use. But it's a pretty ingenious solution that you guys had there of just like, you know what, we're gonna do with what works for us.
Yeah, I can't take the credit for that one, but it does work for us, that's for sure.
So when it comes to, you mentioned you onboard new carriers as soon as they get brought into your ecosystem, this kind of monitoring and feedback is kind of like constant. So what do you guys look for in a quality carrier, or what is something that other three PLs or freight brokers should be looking for in a quality carrier? Because obviously freight fraud is on the rise, unfortunately, in the worst way possible. How do you guys really set those requirements and say, hey, if they meet three of the four, unfortunately, we're not willing to compromise on that four? Are there any areas that you guys do compromise on those requirements, or is it pretty much like this is it? It is what it is.
Yeah, so the word quality is also very synonymous with the word qualification, right? Like that every brokerage should have rock solid carrier qualification and vetting guidelines. These are, compliance standards that new entrants into the marketplace must adhere to, or new entrants into your ecosystem, and also all of the carriers in your existing ecosystem must adhere to as well. It is not the position of a freight brokerage to determine what makes a carrier safe or unsafe. That is the job of our friends at the FMCSA. However, it is up to each freight brokerage to determine to what data points constitute a qualified carrier to be able to work with you. There are some brokerages in the country, for example, that require as much as 2 years of maintained authority to be even able to be evaluated. Yet there are a lot of the mega brokerages that, baby's first load, 0 days authority. As soon as, the moment that you get your authority, call me. I have freight for you. So you see a lot of polar ends, of what makes carrier qualification depending on the freight brokers that you ask. But a lot of those data points come into a blender to try to determine, are you running your business effectively? Are you financially solvent? Are you, do you have any kind of liquidity? In the instance of a claim, what's the aptitude or the likelihood that you're going to leave us high and dry? Or something along those lines, right? There's a lot more that goes into this as compared to just what's your safety rating. So you're trying to really kind of feel your way into the data points that are available to you to determine what is going to happen with service levels or what's going to happen in the instance of a claim with a carrier. And there are a lot of great tools in the marketplace that facilitate us being able to do that today. The 2010s and the late 2000s were the time period of carrier monitoring. And now in the 2020s, we moved into a period of carrier identity. Not only do you have to look good on paper, but I have to feel 100% confident that you are who you say that you are. We are in an industry where 99.99% of the people that we talk to on the phone on any given day, any given year, we will never meet in person, period. That's just the fact of the matter. So how do I, as someone sitting at a desk in a Sunset Transportation office, validate to the best of my ability that you are who you say that you are? You're going to provide me the service levels that I need, and most importantly, you're going to be safe operating on the roadways. And like I mentioned, there's so much improvements to existing tech and also emerging tech that is facilitating not just ourselves but most freight brokerages in the country to be able to do that.
Oh, 100%. It's completely night and day different from kind of like you said, the 2010s and everything like that. If it was one thing for me, if I looked up a carrier and they didn't really have a website and 2010. I was like, okay, not weird, but not necessarily a red flag, just kind of like, all right, they're small, they aren't going to have one. But now, even for like a smaller cut carrier, if I can't find any presence of them online, even a Facebook page, like I'm just like, okay, something, this is almost more of a red flag that you have no digital presence, especially if your email, this is no shade, but it is shade, especially if your email ends in at Yahoo or at Gmail. Like, my man, you couldn't even spring for the at imatrucker.com. Like, come on, man.
Yeah, and we have to be mindful. There's another data point that goes into that, and that's the size of the fleet, right? If you're a one-man band, there's no need to bring GoDaddy into this just so you don't have a Gmail address, okay? That's totally fine. But if you've got 20, like at least 25 trucks, okay, let's start putting on this appearance that we're running a semi-legitimate outfit here and that we're taking our business seriously. But we don't want to penalize the guys that are just out there doing their own thing under those criteria by any means.
Yeah, 100%. There's one of the, that's also kind of where you're like, okay, if you are an owner operator, I expect you to kind of have that Gmail address, but I also kind of expect you to have like a Facebook page where it's like you just posting pictures of your truck somewhere, because I have never met a owner operator that doesn't love a good Facebook post of their truck. But then also like,
That's totally true.
but also if you are one of those like larger carriers or you've grown, like you don't need to get anything fancy. Like, I'd be even happy if you had a very clearly template Squarespace situation that I could look up. I just need to know, I just need a mailing address or a contact us or a phone number on that website that's going to match what you've told me somewhere else. I just need a way to verify a couple times to make sure that it's real. Speaking of verifying, just a little off topic tangent, do you have any favorite red flags that you've seen that you're like, oh, this is actually creative? Like, is there anything that has kind of, as a red flag, made you kind of giggle or go, I'm actually kind of impressed? I'm not working with you, but I'm impressed.
Yeah, there's obviously I have the number wrong, but it was the address in Montana that was exposed. It was like a 4 office facility in the middle of nowhere in Montana, and it had over 300 registered carrier MCs at it. And that was one of those things where it's like, you know what? At this point, I'm just impressed that people continue to route freight on people registered to this address. I know that there are a few more extreme examples of that, and that's the one that comes to mind. But it seems like every month, or at least once a quarter, we're seeing some detective work, some PI work that someone on LinkedIn has done to be like, there are 80 carriers registered at this address. There are 300 carriers registered at this address. How is that a thing? And of course, it always ends in a call to action to the FMCSA. But it gets to the point where it's like, you know what? I'm not even mad. I'm just impressed.
Like 4 or 5 registered to one, I can kind of be like, okay, all right. But like once you start cresting like 50 plus all the way up to 300, like I'd be like, oh man, this is going to set off a red flag somewhere of yet another no, yet another MC registered to this random PO box thing, whatever.
Yeah, it's such a failure on so many levels that you can't help but laugh.
um just or cry, laugh or cry, who really knows at this point in time. So when so I guess if you have, like, you touched on earlier, you have these carriers that maybe work great in Office A but not Office B, so now you just kind of handle it through Office A. Well, what about when you have that situation that's across the whole network, this carrier starts underperforming? Do you guys start having those coaching sessions with them of like, hey, what's going on, and kind of get them on some freight that they're going to be more successful on? Or is it one of those where like, well, you're not holding up your end of the deal, so like we done?
That's a great question. So, what we do is obviously after we've identified that there is a need for corrective action, as much as I hate that term, there is a need for corrective action in some capacity for us to continue to want to work with that carrier. And how do you make sure that that corrective action is just not words over the phone or words on paper, that this is what we're going to do, that we say that we do? And a very unique thing that we have done is to be able to follow through on corrective action is we have actually built a homegrown carrier CRM for risk management. No different than a salesperson would use a CRM for, I need to follow up with this client on this day about this opportunity. We have systematically created tasks that say we need to follow up with this carrier on this day to challenge them about where they are and out and following the new policies and procedures that they said that they would adhere to as part of corrective action with us. So we have both manually created tasks and systematically created tasks that are on shorter cycles, longer cycles, but ultimately have led to us having a full control tower of visibility to making sure that the carriers that we have, said that they're going to begin doing this, we're making sure that they actually are doing this. And we have a third party team. They're a Switzerland of sorts in the way of our risk and compliance team. They're on no one's side. They're not on our operations team side, and they're not on the carriers team side. They're going to look at each scenario in black and white and make the educated decision as to whether or not it's in the best interest of the company to continue working with that carrier. And they're the ones that manage that risk management CRM. But it's been we look back at what we were doing before that, and we were absolutely flying blind. We were just taking so many people's words for it that things would get better. And then now we actually have tools in place to manage the life cycle of corrective action, whether that's service levels, whether that's claim related, whether that's we've had a bad experience working with you lately. There's so many different signals that we can now evaluate to be able to get those tasks created and facilitate conversations with those carriers.
I absolutely love that. Talk about growth. Talk about growth. Being able to make all these changes, look back and say, wow, we've really come a far way. I love that for you guys. That's fantastic.
We look at the growth, but we also lean into some of those underlying metrics. And one of the things that's grown as we've grown is a metric that we look at internally called loads to carrier ratio. For how many loads am I moving over a certain time frame, and how many partner carriers did it take me to be able to get all of those loads executed? And we see that number over time has risen in parallel with Sunset's growth rate over the years. So we don't think it's any secret to our success that we are invested in building, fostering, and growing carrier relationships to be able to lay the foundation for growth at scale and to be able to get quality carriers in with quality clients.
I absolutely love that. That is, you know what? I'm gonna pull a page out of Sunset's book and say that's the Sunset way.
It is the Sunset way.
All right, so we are running out of time a little bit, but I have 2 questions for you. And this one is hopefully really short. What's your biggest piece of advice to someone that's looking to improve their carrier monitoring system? Like where's the best place to start, or to even start getting a hold of it?
Oh, goodness. It is such a diverse and expansive marketplace, and there are providers out there for every size. I would encourage you, definitely do your research. But in 2024, data is cheap. That's the fact of the matter. Data is able to be traded faster than ever, and data is cheaper than ever. So getting a cost-effective solution is more and more likely every single day. I would argue that even the smallest of shops at this point, with how cheap the space has become to get a quality partner in the carrier monitoring space, and if you have at least 5 people in your office, you should have something. Even if it's the most basic offering in the market, I promise you it's affordable. So you got me on my heels with that one, but ultimately, I'm not going to name names. This isn't a tier list. We can come on another time and we can do a carrier monitoring tier list if you would like. I have my preferred partners. I have some partners I would not recommend, but ultimately, I would encourage those looking in the space to do their research, do their due diligence, and make sure that they pick a cost-effective provider for themselves.
So essentially something is better than nothing.
Something is better than nothing, and if you have nothing, then you're not doing something.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So this is my favorite question of the day, and it might be the hardest question that you're asked all day. Are you ready for it?
You got it.
Is a hot dog a sandwich?
Mary, does ESPN have a sandwich eating contest?
I'm sure on ESPN 8 the Ocho Day, they probably do, but
they have hot dog eating contests. Okay. Joey Chestnut is Joey Chestnut for a reason, because that meat between a bun is a hot dog. It is not a sandwich. Okay. And until I see a sandwich eating contest on ESPN, it's a hot dog.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I am also a team hot dog is not a sandwich, because if you go to a deli you don't see hot dogs on the menu. Like, and if you said, hey, make me a sandwich, and you brought me a hot dog, I would be a little bummed. Not entirely bummed, but I'd be a little bummed.
Did 125,000 people have to petition Apple to create a sandwich emoji? No. They had to do that to create a hot dog emoji because so many people believe that a hot dog is a hot dog.
I absolutely love that. Best argument I've heard, hands down. Um, so if someone wants to reach out to you about your the hot dog emoji, or getting set up with carrier compliance monitoring, where can they find you outside the show?
Sure. All hot dog related inquiries can go to my personal Facebook. You can find me on there. But any professional related inquiries can go to my LinkedIn. You can find me at John Sutton on LinkedIn, Director of Corporate Strategy for Sunset Transportation. Very active on there, pretty engaged in the space. So feel free to reach out.
Awesome. You guys heard it here first. Both of John's DMs are open and ready for your comments. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Mary.
Find Check Call the Podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, like Apple Podcast and Spotify. Don't forget to check out all the other incredible FreightWaves shows, and don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter on freightwaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.